probably doing a lecture on the legend of Sleepy Hollow. This will be part one to a two-part series, so look forward to the next part and the oncoming videos. First up, we're going to discuss vocab. You can pause the video if you want to read the definitions. I'm only going to be covering a few key terms, such as Hessian, which relates to the German state of Hesse, a state known for its forest, and Wiesbaden, a Roman spa town. I have up in the top right corner an Irish Roman bath, but the place we see Hessian described is the Hessian trooper, otherwise known as the headless horseman. Now, Hessian troopers during the American Revolution were pretty despised by the American colonists, so I do believe that that term is pretty important to understanding the background. Also, a crane, which as a bird is noted for its elaborate courtship dances, which I think is a very fitting description for Ichabod. Next up, we have a coquette, which is a flirtatious woman, or it could also be used to describe a crested hummingbird from Central or South America. And then we have a couple fun terms here, like pop guns, whirligigs, and fly cages, which are all just children's toys. And then, last but not least, we have the 10-pound court. Now, this is based on the Act of 1785, which allowed justices of the peace to take care of civil law cases without a jury in disputes involving a sum total of less than 10 pounds. And I have to the right an example of when the 10-pound court would have been used. So, first off, let's talk about the general plot. Thus far from the assigned reading. So, Ichabod Crane is a schoolmaster. He's very superstitious, and he has an insatiable greed, not just for food, but also his wild dreams that he has. He pines after Katrina von Tassel of the von Tassel family because of their wealth and her physical appearance. His adversary in the story is going to be Abraham, otherwise known as Brom Bones. He's a burly character who likes to prank Ichabod throughout the story. He also pines for Katrina. That's where that conflict comes from. And he plays on Ichabod's superstition in order to mock him. At the end of the assigned reading, there is an event announced for a party happening at the Von Tassels. This story is a satirical take on Dutch ghost stories, and just, in general, satirical take on ghost stories has been used in pop culture, in media recently, just as recent as 2013 even, with A Haunted House. It's more obviously going to be a parody. It's more blunt about it, but stories like this are being used today, and I think that is important to discuss. So the setting, this one's going to be pretty basic. It's going to be Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. Both of them are located in New York. In the picture I have on the left, I have this fun little marker pointing to a place called Irvington, which is going to be named after Washington Irving, who wrote the story. Above that I have Tarrytown, and on the picture on the right, above Tarrytown, is Sleepy Hollow and an Old Dutch Reformed church. Now, the reason I'm pointing out the Old Dutch Reformed church is its relevance to the culture of being a popular denomination, the Dutch Reformed Protestantism. But that's all I really wanted to discuss for setting. So, now to talk about characters, we have Ichabod Crane. He's going to be our protagonist. I have a couple quotations here to describe him. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple credulity. His appetite for the marvelous and his powers of digesting it were equally extraordinary. He has big dreams, basically. But he's also very superstitious. He was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he most firmly and potently believed. We also have his students. Now he tries to stay on their good sides so that he can lodge at their houses as well as flirt with their sisters if they happen to have, pretty sisters. And there are two types of students that he has, the strong and the weak. The strong, he considers them to be Dutch urchins, and the weak, puny striplings. He goes doubly hard on the Dutch urchins because, he knows they can withstand the punishment, but he also consoles them afterwards. So he's considered a nice teacher, even though, we don't consider, beating your students today very nice. And then for the week, he would always just go easy on them. And then we have the Galloping Hessian, Galloping Hessian, or Hessian Trooper, otherwise known as the Headless Horseman. He's considered the antagonist of the story, but I don't think he really is. I would consider him more of a plot device. Now, he's noted for being very fast, and according to the village, he lost his head in the American Revolution by a cannon, it says in some nondescript battle. And he's very fast, owing to his being belated and in a hurry to get back to the churchyard before daybreak, as the story goes. And Irving describes it as a legendary superstition of the area. Jos van Houten, not a very important character, just wanted to point out the fact that he was the one who was the architect for the building. His name is mentioned, but he doesn't play a role in the story, really. Next up, we have Cotton Mather, historically a New England Puritan minister. He tried to distance himself from the Salem witch trials, which his father participated in, but it's found by some writers that there is evidence that he did not necessarily disagree with the accusations of, the witches, big quotations around witches. That was the author of the witchcraft historical that Ichabod is infatuated with. We have Katrina von Tassel. She's the Cockette, the flirtatious damsel of the story, described as a blooming lass, plump as a partridge, universally famed not merely for her beauty, but her vast expectations. She wears expensive foreign clothing, and she's courted by both Ichabod and Brom Bones. We have old Baltus von Tassel. Sometimes he's just referred to as Balt. He's a very generous farmer, and he has a lot of wealth, and he is the father of Katrina. He doesn't really interfere with what she's doing, kind of just lets her do her own thing, kind of like Dom van Tassel, who would say, birds are silly things, but girls can take care of themselves. And then we have this very important character right here, the antagonist of the story, really, Abraham von Brunt, otherwise known as Brom Bones, described as having broad-shouldered and he was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short black curly hair and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. He likes to cause mischief and prank Crane. He's described as waggish. He's a skilled horseman, and he's burly, and he is also after Katrina. And then at the very end of the reading that I had for this lecture is introduced the messenger, who just announces the event happening at the Van Tassels. So now we're going to cover some key quotations. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and even pervade the very atmosphere that holds a spell over the minds of good people. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Now, this description of Tarrytown shows that the people there are very superstitious, and even people who are just visiting there end up becoming very superstitious and coming up with their own encounters because of the paranoia that's around the town. Then there's a description of the Headless Horseman, otherwise known as the Hessian Trooper, and to the right I have an illustration of the Hessian soldiers, which I mentioned earlier that the American colonists during the American Revolution really just despised. Irving writes, such is the general purport of this legendary superstition, which has furnished materials for many a wild story in that region of shadows. So immediately after describing the Hessian Trooper, Headless Horseman, he immediately discredits it in the story. And that's going to be important later on, as we'll see. More key quotations. Crane kept on good terms with his pupils, who happened to have pretty sisters or good housewives for mothers, and boarded and lodged at the houses of the farmers whose children he instructed. He found favor in the eyes of the mothers by petting the children. This shows the type of lifestyle that Crane leads. He's a womanizer and a people pleaser. It also says that he, whenever he boards with the farmers of the children's parents, the children that he instructed, he would always do like the lightest tasks around the farm just to stay on their good side. Then we have this quotation here. How often was Crane thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast howling among the trees, and the idea that it was the galloping Hessian on one of his nightly scourings. Now, based on this, we already see that Ichabod is paranoid whenever he travels at night. He already has superstition surrounding the Headless Horseman. And I have to the right a picture of a whippoorwill bird, which is a nocturnal bird. It's mentioned just the page prior, right after mentioning Crane's paranoia when traveling at night. So it is important, and we will see a lot of bird imagery in this story. Now, moving on, we have, as the enraptured Ichabod fancied all this, when it's referring to after he's looking at the Van Tassel's land, and as he rolled his great green eyes over the fat meadowlands, his heart yearned after the damsel who was to inherit these domains, and his imagination expanded with the idea. So it shows his motive for trying to court Katrina. It's not for love, it's just for hunger for wealth, pretty much. And then we have a description of Brom Bones and his stature, which we can compare to Ichabod's lanky stature. Brom Bones, from his Herculean frame and great powers of limb, he had received the nickname of Brom Bones, by which he is universally known, just as Ichabod is known as Crane. That's his cognomen. He was famed for great knowledge and skill in horsemanship, and that's going to be very important later on. And I have this nice little illustration to the right, you versus the guy she tells you not to worry about, where I have a literal crane and then someone I think who fits the description of Brom Bones quite well. Now, moving on, we have Brom Bones. This rantable hero had for some times singled out the blooming Katrina, and it was whispered that she did not altogether discourage his hopes. Such was the formidable rival with whom Ichabod Crane had to contend. This shows the rivalry between Bones and Crane because of their affections towards Katrina. I also have the definition of rantable up there, basically someone who is wild and unruly. And then Irving, he writes his view on women, which I think is quite interesting. He says, I profess not to know how women's hearts are wooed and won. To me, they have always been matters of riddle and admiration. Some seem to have but one vulnerable point or door of access, while others have thousands of avenues. Now, if you remember from his biography, which I did a video on, ironically, he was pretty much single his whole life. So if that speaks any volumes for, how he viewed women. Next up, we have this other description right here. He who keeps undisputed sway over the heart of a coquette is indeed a hero. Certain it is, this was not the case with the redoubtable Brom Bones. And from the moment Ichabod Crane made his advances, the interests of the former, Bones, evidently declined, and a deadly feud gradually arose between him and the preceptor, Ichabod Crane, of Sleepy Hollow. I defined preceptor in the vocab section. You can go back and look at that if you want. But I also have a picture of what a coquette looks like. That is a very colorful hummingbird. Also describes a flirtatious woman. So this quotation is important because it's really just the point of conflict. Bones, who Irving would describe wins 1,000 hearts, is jealous of Ichabod because he has more sway in courting Katrina, and he's very resentful of Crane. So that's his motive for pulling all these pranks on Crane and just trying to make a fool out of Crane. Speaking of which, Ichabod became the object of whimsical persecution to Bones and his gang of rough riders. They harried his hitherto peaceful domains, so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the country held their meeting there. Brom took all opportunities of turning him into ridicule in the presence of his mistress. I also have this humorous illustration to the right in reference to the story Brom Bones and his gang. They were described as turning all the chairs topsy-turvy in his classroom, and Ichabod's immediate response is jumping to something supernatural, so like Judge Claude Frodo, witchcraft, which I think, he describes both physically and as a character a lot of Ichabod Crane. So this is how Bones responds to the point of conflict, by pranking Ichabod. So that's it for the main lecture portion of this. Now, things I want you to look for moving forward, if you haven't finished the reading, is going to be Ichabod's character, the description of the people of Tarrytown, the description of the Headless Horseman and Bones's character, the narrator and his views of the story, and symbolism. As we have seen, there's a lot of imagery of birds. So just going from top to bottom, left to right, I'm just going to talk about all the birds that have been mentioned so far. We have the whippoorwill, the nocturnal bird, mentioned with Ichabod's paranoia when traveling at night. Below that we have a coquette, as in the bird, which describes a flirtatious female, or the colorful hummingbird. Below that we have a partridge, which also is used to describe Katrina. And then we have the rooster, which is described as the gallant cock. And then below that we also have the screech owl. And then right below that we have the crane, which is used to describe Ichabod. And then I want you to carefully read the ending, if you haven't already, and determine what happened. Make sure you don't get tricked, because a lot of people have. So that brings us to the reading assignment, if you are following along. Finish reading The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. If you're reading it from the Great American Short Stories from the Fall River Press, once again, that's the Great American Short Stories from the Fall River Press. That's pages 24 to 34 after the messenger comes in. Take notes if you need to, otherwise just read carefully, and try to answer the following. What does Irving think about Crane, and what text is there to support this? What new characters are introduced? What are their roles in the story? What happened in the end? How can you tell? List some examples of foreshadowing that Irving uses. And then just an interesting question at the end. If you could change the story, what would you change? You can feel free to leave a comment below if you want to, change the ending of the story and, try to come up with a very interesting telling of it. And that also brings me to just an optional creative writing assignment. I may do it in my pastime because it just seems like a fun prompt. Using the same inspiration as Irving, write a short story based around the Hessian trooper, Henry Hudson and his crew, or some other folklore. It doesn't have to be Dutch-inspired, obviously. And you can treat them as real or discredit them in a satirical manner. It's really up to you if you even want to do it, but I think it's just a fun little writing thing that you can try out. But overall, that's going to be it for this lecture. I have this quotation from Washington Irving, who wrote the story. Great minds have purposes, others have wishes. And then I have this picture at the bottom from the inside of Sunnyside. Overall, thank you for your patience and sticking through with me to the end. And thank you for watching. See you in the next one.